According to a person with knowledge of the situation, the players' union proposal would allegedly result in projected losses of $460 million over the life.
What if one number could shut down an entire professional sports league? Right now, that number is $460 million. That's the projected loss owners could face if they agree to the latest Players Association proposal. And suddenly, the WNBA isn't just negotiating a new CBA. It's staring at a potential lockout that could wipe out the 2026 season entirely. Public statements have turned aggressive. Union leadership has openly said someone will have to fold. Owners, on the other hand, are reportedly unwilling to absorb nearly $500 million in projected losses. And hovering in the background is a brand new rival league, expansion teams on the way, and a surge in revenue that may or may not be sustainable. But here's the uncomfortable part no one wants to say out loud. This financial explosion didn't happen in a vacuum. So the real question isn't just about revenue splits. It's about who really created the pie and who deserves the biggest slice. The moment everything shifted,
Calling out the WNBA owners to a standoff for the CBA negotiations. She's basically saying, hey, somebody's gonna have to fold and it ain't gonna be us. This is the nasty red.
Wasn't buried in financial spreadsheets. It wasn't hidden in leaked documents. It was a single sentence. Somebody is going to have to fold, and it's not going to be us. That wasn't quiet negotiation language. That wasn't cautious corporate diplomacy. That was a public challenge. When leadership within the WNBA Players Association made that statement, it immediately reframed the entire CBA conversation. This wasn't just about percentages anymore. It felt like a power struggle, a standoff, a test of who actually controls the future of the league. And that tone matters. In most labor negotiations, both sides posture carefully. They signal strength without escalating publicly, but this felt different. The rhetoric was sharp, direct, almost confrontational, and fans picked up on it instantly. Because here's the reality, the league is in a fragile moment. Yes, viewership has surged. Yes, arenas are fuller than ever. Yes, sponsorship interest is climbing. But the financial foundation of the WNBA has historically been thin. For years, it reportedly operated at losses, supported heavily by NBA backing. The growth is real, but so is the risk. So when union leadership signals they're ready to hold the line at all costs, it raises a serious question. How far are they actually willing to go? A lockout isn't just a headline. It freezes paychecks. It halts expansion. It disrupts momentum. And perhaps most dangerously, it interrupts fan engagement right when the league is experiencing unprecedented visibility. But from the players' perspective, the timing makes sense. They see new TV deals, they see sold-out crowds, they see merchandise flying off shelves, and they're asking a simple question: if the pie is bigger, why are we still eating crumbs? That's where this gets complicated. Because the owners aren't arguing that revenue hasn't increased, they're arguing about sustainability. One hot season doesn't automatically equal long-term profitability, and locking into massive guaranteed financial commitments based on short-term spikes could create a deeper crisis down the road. So now both sides are dug in. The union believes this is the moment to secure long-term security and fair compensation. Owners appear concerned about committing to numbers that may not hold up if the surge cools off, and neither side wants to be the one that folds first. But here what makes the ultimatum so explosive. Once you frame negotiations as a public showdown, backing down becomes harder. Pride gets involved. Optics matter. Fans choose sides. Media narratives intensify. And that transforms what should be a financial discussion into something emotional. That's the danger. Because when negotiations become about winning instead of solving, compromise gets tougher. And in professional sports, history shows that prolonged standoffs rarely end cleanly. The scary part, this might only be the opening move. Because behind that bold statement lies a deeper strategy. one involving alternative leagues, shifting leverage, and a financial structure that may be more fragile than anyone wants to admit. And that's where the real tension begins. But here, where this story takes a turn that feels almost too strategic to ignore. The same vice president of the WNBA Players Association pushing hard in negotiations is also a co-founder of a brand new professional women's basketball league called Unrivaled. And that's where eyebrows started raising. Now, to be clear, launching a new league isn't illegal. It isn't unethical by default. Players have every right to explore new business ventures, and Unrivaled has been marketed as an off-season opportunity, a way for elite players to stay in the United States instead of playing overseas. On the surface, it sounds like empowerment. But critics argue there's a deeper layer here. Because when a union executive, someone directly involved in negotiating the WNBA's future, also helps run a separate, well-funded alternative league, the optics get complicated, very complicated. Some analysts have openly questioned whether the aggressive negotiation tone is purely about improving the WNBA's economic structure, or whether it also strengthens Unrivaled's leverage. After all, if CBA talks collapse and the WNBA season is delayed, where do top players go for income and exposure? Unrivaled instantly becomes the center of attention. More media coverage, more sponsor interest, more players seeking contracts, more bargaining power. Now there's no verified evidence that this is the strategy, and it's important not to present speculation as fact, but the perception alone is powerful. In high-stakes business negotiations, perception can be just as influential as reality. Imagine you're a WNBA owner sitting at the table. Across from you is a union leader who publicly says the players won't fold. And that same leader has a financial interest in a competing basketball league that could benefit if your season collapses. Even if everything is above board, trust becomes fragile. And that's the word that keeps surfacing behind the scenes: trust. The WNBA's entire economic system relies on cooperation. Owners invest heavily up front. The NBA has historically subsidized operations. Expansion cities like Toronto and Portland are preparing to launch new franchises. The league is trying to build long-term stability. But long-term stability requires alignment. If ownership starts believing that union leadership is comfortable risking a lockout, or even strategically leveraging that possibility, negotiations stiffen instantly. Defensive walls go up. Offers become tighter. Concessions shrink. And fans, they're caught in the middle. Some supporters argue that players finally have leverage and should use it. Others worry that destabilizing the league during its most promising growth period could backfire. Social media has already turned the debate into a heated battleground. What makes this moment so volatile is timing. Unrivaled reportedly has strong financial backing. It offers shorter seasons, higher per-game payouts, a more player-controlled structure. In many ways, it represents a modern, flexible alternative to traditional league economics. That alone shifts power dynamics. For decades, WNBA players had limited domestic options. Overseas leagues filled the gap. Now there's a stateside competitor that changes everything. Because even if Unrivaled never intends to replace the WNBA, its existence creates leverage, and leverage changes negotiation psychology. So the real question isn't whether Unrivaled is good or bad. It's whether its presence is subtly reshaping the entire CBA battle. And if that's true, then this isn't just a labor dispute anymore. It's a chess match with two boards being played at once. This is where the tension turns into pure math. The Players Association didn't just ask for incremental raises. They submitted a proposal requesting 25% of the league's gross revenue in year one, escalating to an average of roughly 27.5% over the life of the agreement. Originally, reports suggest they aimed even higher, closer to 30% before adjusting downward. On top of that, they're pushing for a salary cap near $9.5 million per team, plus continued housing benefits for early career players. At first glance, 25% doesn't sound outrageous. In the NBA and NFL, players split basketball-related income almost evenly with ownership. So why is this number causing panic? Because gross revenue is doing all the heavy lifting in this argument. Gross revenue is the total money coming in before expenses. That includes ticket sales, media rights, sponsorship deals, merchandise, everything. But it doesn't subtract arena costs, travel expenses, marketing budgets, staff salaries, insurance, expansion investments, or operational overhead. And that distinction changes everything. According to reports circulating around the negotiations, ownership groups believe accepting the proposal as structured could result in approximately $460 million in projected losses over the life of the agreement. That's not a rounding error, that's a structural threat. Now it's important to frame this carefully. The exact numbers have not been publicly audited in full detail. The $460 million figure has been attributed to sources familiar with the discussions. So while that estimate is widely cited, both sides may dispute the projections behind closed doors. But the perception of those losses is what's driving resistance. Ownership countered with an alternative structure that reportedly offered players over 70% of league and team net value. Net value means profits, what remains after expenses. The union rejected that framework. Why? Because profits in the WNBA have historically been thin, and in some markets, possibly non-existent. If you negotiate a percentage of profits in a league that operates at or near break-even, your payout could remain limited. Gross revenue, however, is guaranteed to be higher because it sits at the top of the financial pyramid. From the player's perspective, the timing makes sense. Revenue has spiked, attendance is up, media deals are growing, there's visible momentum. They don't want to wait years to capture value during what feels like a breakthrough era. From ownership's perspective, committing to fixed high-percentage payouts based on a recent surge could create long-term instability if revenue cools. Locking into aggressive guarantees during a growth spike can be risky, especially for a league still solidifying its economic base. And this is the fundamental disconnect. The union sees leverage, owners see volatility. The union sees growth, owners see exposure. The union believes this is the moment to secure generational financial progress. Owners worry that if projections soften even slightly, the math collapses. And because both sides are arguing from entirely different financial philosophies, gross versus net, momentum versus sustainability, compromise becomes incredibly difficult. But here's the twist: none of this is happening in a vacuum. These revenue demands are emerging during the most high-profile season in league history, and that's not coincidence. Because when the spotlight gets brighter, everyone wants a bigger share of what's shining. And that leads directly to the next explosive layer of this battle, the player many believe changed the entire economic equation almost overnight. Here's the part almost no one wants to break down clearly, because once you do, it gets uncomfortable fast. The entire standoff hinges on two words: gross and net. To the average fan, revenue is revenue. Money comes in, players get paid. Simple. But in professional sports, the difference between gross revenue and net profit is the line between growth and collapse. Gross revenue is the top-line number: every ticket sold, every sponsorship deal, every broadcast contract, every jersey purchased. It's the biggest, flashiest number on the spreadsheet. Net profit is what's left after everything else is paid. Arena rentals, travel, marketing, staff salaries, insurance, security, expansion costs, charter flights, front office operations, facility upgrades, media production, taxes. And those expenses are not small. The Players Association is pushing for a percentage of gross revenue. Ownership reportedly countered with a percentage of net value. That's not a minor technical disagreement, it's a completely different financial philosophy. Because if you take 25% of gross revenue before subtracting expenses, ownership absorbs all the risk if costs spike or revenue cools. But if you split net profit, players share in both the upside and the downside. From the player's perspective, gross revenue feels safer. It guarantees participation in the league's growth. It protects against accounting strategies that could minimize reported profits. And in a moment when viewership and sponsorship interest are climbing, it feels justified. From ownership's perspective, tying salaries directly to gross revenue during an expansion phase is dangerous. Think about what's happening simultaneously. New franchises in Toronto and Portland are coming online. Expansion costs are enormous. Marketing investments are rising. Travel accommodations have improved, including increased charter flights. Operational budgets are expanding to capitalize on new fan interest. That means expenses are climbing at the same time revenue is climbing. And here's the critical question. What happens if revenue growth slows while expenses remain high? That's the scenario owners appear worried about. The reported projection of roughly $460 million in potential losses over the life of the proposed agreement, while not independently verified publicly, is being cited as evidence that the math doesn't currently balance. Even if that number shifts in negotiation, the fear behind it is real. Because once you lock into guaranteed financial structures in a collective bargaining agreement, you can't easily adjust them. And here's the deeper tension. The WNBA has historically operated with financial support from the NBA. For years, profitability wasn't the driving headline, survival and growth were. Now that visibility is rising, the question becomes, is this moment the start of long-term profitability or a short-term surge driven by extraordinary attention? If it's sustainable, then committing to higher gross revenue splits could accelerate growth and player security. If it's temporary, locking into aggressive guarantees could strain the league's foundation. That's the math nobody wants to say out loud. This isn't simply about fairness, it's about risk tolerance. Players are betting that the growth is real and durable. Owners are cautious about building permanent obligations on what could still be a volatile economic model. And until both sides agree on which version of the future they believe in, gross versus net isn't just an accounting term. It's the fault line threatening to split the league in two. Now we get to the name that quietly sits at the center of this entire storm, Caitlin Clark. Whether people want to admit it or not, her arrival changed the temperature of the league almost overnight. Before Clark stepped onto a WNBA court, the league was growing, but steadily, gradually. Attendance numbers were improving in certain markets. Media coverage was expanding, but the explosion that happened when Clark entered the picture. Suddenly, arenas were selling out across the country, not just in her home market, everywhere. Road games became events. Broadcast networks shifted time slots to maximize viewership. Social media engagement spiked. Jersey sales surged. Casual sports fans who had never tuned into a WNBA game were suddenly watching full quarters. Now, it's important to be precise here. Clark did not single-handedly build the WNBA. The league has existed for nearly 3 decades. Generations of elite players laid the foundation. Stars carried the sport through difficult financial years. Growth was happening long before she arrived. But many fans, and even some analysts, argue that Clark acted as an accelerant, a catalyst, the spark that turned steady growth into a mainstream surge. And that's where the tension begins. Because the current CBA demands are emerging at the exact moment when revenue visibility is at its highest. Television ratings are stronger, corporate interest is expanding, merchandise momentum is real. From the union's perspective, this looks like the breakthrough era players have been waiting for. Why wait 3 more years to negotiate from strength when the spotlight is already here. But ownership appears to see it differently. From a business standpoint, one extraordinary rookie-driven surge does not automatically guarantee a decade of consistent profitability. Investors look at multi-year trends. They evaluate sustainability. They ask whether consumer interest remains if injuries happen, storylines shift, or attention moves elsewhere. That's the silent debate under the surface. Is this a permanent shift in women's basketball economics or a historic spike driven by one generational personality? Some critics have framed it bluntly, suggesting players are trying to secure long-term financial commitments based on a revenue wave they didn't entirely generate themselves. That framing is controversial and oversimplified, but it reflects a real narrative circulating online. At the same time, many supporters push back hard on that idea. They argue that Clarke's popularity doesn't exist in isolation. She's competing against elite professionals. The rivalries, the competition, the veteran stars, all of that fuels the product. A league cannot thrive on one player alone. And that's true. But leverage in negotiations often aligns with visibility. And Clarke's arrival undeniably increased the league's visibility. So now the question becomes uncomfortable. Should players capitalize aggressively on this moment while leverage is high, or should they wait to prove that the growth is durable? That's the gamble. If the surge sustains, players who pushed for a larger share will look visionary. If the momentum cools and the league struggles under heavier financial guarantees, critics will argue the demands came too soon. Either way, Clarke's presence has altered the negotiating landscape. Not because she asked for it, but because economics follows attention. And right now, attention has never been higher. Here's the part ownership is quietly obsessing over. What if this is the peak, not the beginning? From the outside, everything looks explosive. Ratings are up, arenas are louder, corporate sponsors are circling. Expansion teams in Toronto and Portland are preparing to enter the league. Momentum feels undeniable. But inside boardrooms, excitement doesn't replace spreadsheets. Owners aren't just looking at this season. They're projecting 5 years out, 10 years out. They're asking the question investors always ask: is this growth sustainable, or is it a surge fueled by a perfect storm of media attention, generational star power, and viral storylines? Because locking into aggressive long-term financial guarantees based on a short-term spike is one of the fastest ways to destabilize a young league. The WNBA's history matters here. For much of its existence, the league reportedly operated at a deficit. It relied heavily on support from its NBA parent structure to maintain stability. That doesn't mean the league wasn't valuable. It means profitability wasn't consistent. Now, after years of steady building, the spotlight is finally bright. But stability in professional sports isn't built on one strong season. It's built on predictable, repeatable revenue streams, long-term media contracts, sustained ticket sales, multi-year sponsorship commitments. And those are still being tested. Expansion adds another layer of risk. Launching new franchises requires enormous upfront investment. Marketing, staffing, facilities, community outreach, those costs come before profits. If salary structures balloon simultaneously, ownership absorbs double exposure, rising expenses plus rising guaranteed payouts. That's what fuels the sustainability fear. From the union's perspective, this sounds overly cautious, maybe even pessimistic. Players argue that if the league never takes financial leaps during growth moments, it will remain stuck in modest increments forever. Momentum, they believe, should be rewarded when it exists. But ownership sees it differently. They remember other leagues that expanded too aggressively. They've seen media bubbles burst. They understand how quickly public attention can shift in the modern sports landscape. One injury, one controversy, one competing entertainment wave, and ratings soften. If revenue dips, while fixed salary obligations remain high, losses accelerate fast. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once you sign a collective bargaining agreement, reversing it isn't easy. You can't simply renegotiate mid-cycle without triggering another labor war. So owners are calculating risk, not just reward. They're asking, if this level of attendance and viewership holds for 3 to 5 seasons, then yes, higher revenue splits may be completely justified. But if it retreats even 15 to 20%, does the current proposal still work? That's the math behind the hesitation. And this is where the gap widens. Players see confidence in the league's future. Owners see volatility in a league still transitioning from subsidized growth to independent profitability. Neither side is necessarily irrational, but they're betting on different versions of tomorrow. One side believes this is the dawn of a new economic era. The other fears overcommitting before that era is fully secured. And until both sides agree on what the future truly looks like, sustainability will remain the silent force driving every tense negotiation room conversation. Because in professional sports, excitement builds headlines, but sustainability builds survival. Just when this battle started feeling like a deadlock, one billionaire stepped in and reframed the entire conversation, Mark Cuban. And he didn't sugarcoat it. Cuban looked at the financial tension between players and ownership and pointed out something that almost sounds unbelievable at first. Many top women's college basketball stars are currently earning more money staying in school than they would as WNBA rookies. Let that sink in. Because of nil name, image, and likeness deals, elite college athletes in major conferences are reportedly pulling in anywhere from high six figures to over $1 million annually. Corporate sponsorships, booster collectives, local endorsement deals, social media partnerships. On top of that, their housing, meals, travel, and training facilities are heavily subsidized. Then they graduate. They get drafted. And their WNBA rookie contract pays significantly less. From a pure economic standpoint, that's backwards. Professional leagues are supposed to represent the financial upgrade, the pinnacle, the reward for making it to the next level. Cuban called this out bluntly. No matter what the WNBA does with its current salary structure, he argued, most star college players will still technically take a pay cut entering the league. And that's not just a public relations problem, it's a structural one. Because if the professional league can't compete with the amateur system in earning potential, it creates long-term pressure. Either players delay entering the draft or they demand aggressive salary adjustments immediately. Cuban's point wasn't necessarily that the players are wrong for wanting more. His argument was that the current system is economically misaligned from the start. The WNBA doesn't have the massive local television contracts that fuel NBA franchises. It doesn't have decades of billion-dollar media rights growth to lean on. So simply demanding higher base salaries from league revenue alone may not fix the imbalance. That's where his perspective becomes interesting. Instead of framing the fight as players versus owners, Cuban reframed it as a structural design flaw. He essentially said, you can't scream money into existence. If the operating cash flow doesn't support massive guaranteed raises, forcing it through negotiation alone won't magically solve the math. But here's the twist. He didn't just criticize the system. He hinted that the entire compensation model needs to evolve. Because if NIL has proven anything, it's that corporate America is willing to pay for star power even at the college level. So maybe the answer isn't squeezing more out of the league's existing revenue pool. Maybe it's expanding the pool entirely. That perspective shifts the debate away from hostility and toward innovation. Instead of arguing over a fixed pie, Cuban suggested the real solution might involve bringing in outside dollars in a way that doesn't cripple team balance sheets. And that's why his comments hit differently. He's built companies from scratch, he's navigated salary caps, he's negotiated labor deals. When he speaks on financial structure, people listen, even if they don't fully agree. Because at the core of his message was a sobering reminder: emotion doesn't balance books. And if the WNBA wants to secure long-term stability while raising player earnings, it may need a model that looks very different from traditional league economics. And that's where his proposed solution becomes even more controversial. Here, where the conversation shifts from confrontation to creativity. Instead of forcing the WNBA to stretch its internal revenue beyond what ownership believes is sustainable, Mark Cuban proposed something radical: borrow the nil blueprint from college sports. Think about how nil changed everything. Colleges didn't suddenly double their athletic department budgets to pay players directly. Instead, third-party corporations stepped in. Local businesses, national brands, booster collectives. Athletes get paid through endorsement-style agreements, while schools avoid ballooning their own payroll liabilities. Cuban's idea applies that same logic to the WNBA. Rather than demanding a higher percentage of league-controlled revenue, teams could be allowed, even encouraged, to engineer direct sponsorship deals between local corporations and players. A tech company in Indiana wants to pay a star guard an extra $2 million annually. Structure it as a team-facilitated endorsement partnership. A major brand in New York wants a face of the franchise ambassador deal. Let it happen. The money doesn't come from the team's operating budget. It comes from outside corporate capital. That's the key distinction. Under current traditional league structures, allowing teams to broker direct sponsor payments to players could be seen as salary cap circumvention. In leagues like the NBA, that's tightly regulated. You can't simply ask a sponsor to top off a contract. But Cuban's argument is that the WNBA may need to rewrite those rules entirely. Because here's the reality: corporate America is already investing in women's basketball. Brands see engagement numbers, they see social media traction, they see young demographics tuning in. The appetite exists. So why restrict that money to traditional ad slots and jersey patches when it could directly elevate player compensation? Of course, critics immediately raise the obvious concern: competitive balance. If you open the floodgates to corporate-driven salary supplements, big markets like New York or Los Angeles could attract significantly more sponsorship dollars than smaller markets. That could widen the talent gap and distort parity. But Cuban anticipated that. One possible solution: revenue sharing on external sponsorship deals. A percentage of all corporate-driven nil-style payments could flow into a central league pool, then be redistributed across franchises. That mirrors how some media and sponsorship revenues are handled in other leagues. In theory, this creates two benefits. First, players earn significantly more without forcing ownership into projected massive operational losses. Second, the league grows its overall financial ecosystem instead of cannibalizing its own balance sheet. It's not a perfect system. There would need to be guardrails, experience-based caps, transparency rules, anti-tampering protections, but it shifts the conversation away from slicing a fixed pie and toward baking a larger one. And that's what makes it intriguing. Because right now, the CBA fight feels binary: players versus owners. Cuban's model reframes it as collaboration with external capital. Instead of asking, how much can we take from the league? The question becomes, how much new money can we bring in? It's ambitious, it's controversial, and it would fundamentally change how professional women's basketball structures compensation. But in a moment where both sides feel stuck, innovation might be the only path forward. Otherwise, the alternative isn't progress. It's paralysis. Here's the part that makes this entire situation feel like it's sitting on a ticking clock. The league isn't just negotiating a new CBA in isolation. It's doing so while preparing for major expansion. Two new franchises, one in Toronto and another in Portland, are set to enter the league. Expansion drafts have to be organized. Front offices must be staffed. Branding campaigns need to launch. Ticket sales strategies must roll out months in advance. None of that works smoothly if there's uncertainty about whether a season will even happen. A lockout doesn't just freeze games, it freezes planning. Imagine trying to sell season tickets in a brand new market while headlines scream about a potential labor shutdown. Corporate partners hesitate, fans pause, momentum slows, and expansion, which should signal strength and confidence, suddenly looks reckless. Then there's the draft. The 2026 WNBA draft is supposed to introduce the next wave of talent. Prospects train for years to reach that moment. Agents negotiate. Teams build scouting strategies. But if the labor dispute spills into the regular season calendar, the entire process becomes unstable. Free agency also turns chaotic. Veteran players can't plan. International players hesitate to commit. Sponsors delay activation campaigns. Every moving part in the league's ecosystem depends on clarity, and right now, clarity is in short supply. And here's the bigger issue. The regular season has a scheduled start date. If negotiations drag too long, preseason logistics collapse, travel arrangements can't be finalized, arena bookings conflict with other events, broadcast schedules become complicated. Once you start missing deadlines in professional sports, the domino effect is brutal. History shows that even short labor stoppages can damage fan trust. The WNBA is currently riding unprecedented attention. Casual viewers who recently tuned in might not stick around if the league disappears for months. In today's entertainment landscape, attention shifts quickly. If games stop, fans don't wait patiently, they move on. Some players argue that this is precisely why ownership will eventually concede. Canceling a season would be financially painful for everyone. Owners lose revenue, broadcasters lose content, sponsors lose exposure. So from a leverage standpoint, the threat of a lockout may feel powerful. But ownership may calculate differently. If agreeing to the current proposal risks long-term structural instability, a short-term shutdown might be viewed as the lesser evil. That's the cold, corporate calculus. And that's why this feels so dangerous. Because once both sides believe the other won't blink, escalation becomes likely. The tragic irony is that this dispute is happening at the exact moment the league appears strongest publicly. Expansion should represent growth. Draft buzz should represent optimism. Instead, those milestones are overshadowed by uncertainty. If a deal is reached, the league can ride this momentum into a new era. If talks collapse, the 2026 season could become a cautionary tale about overplaying leverage during a breakthrough moment. And right now, with expansion teams waiting and schedules tightening, the question isn't theoretical anymore. It's simple. Who blinks first before the clock runs out? So here we are. A league riding the biggest wave of attention in its history, players demanding a larger share of revenue they believe they helped elevate, owners warning that the math doesn't yet justify the guarantees being requested, expansion teams waiting in the wings, sponsors watching carefully, fans caught in the middle. And the question hanging over everything is simple: who blinks first? On one side, the Players Association sees momentum. They see packed arenas, rising TV ratings, corporate dollars finally flowing in at a level that feels transformative. From their perspective, this isn't greed, it's timing. Why wait years to negotiate when leverage is at its peak? Why accept incremental progress when the spotlight is finally this bright? On the other side, ownership sees volatility. They remember years of operating deficits. They understand that one explosive season doesn't automatically equal long-term financial stability. They fear locking into aggressive revenue splits tied to gross income before sustainability is proven over multiple cycles. Neither side thinks they're being reckless. The players believe they're fighting for fair value in a league that's finally ascending. The owners believe they're protecting the long-term viability of that very league. And that's what makes this standoff so dangerous? Because when both sides believe they're defending the future, compromise feels like surrender. Add in the presence of alternative leagues, nil-style earning models, expansion costs, and the unprecedented visibility driven by stars like Caitlin Clark, and the pressure multiplies. The spotlight isn't fading, it's intensifying. Every public comment, every leaked number, every rumor becomes fuel for debate. If the union pushes too hard and a lockout happens, the league risks alienating new fans who just arrived. Momentum in professional sports is fragile. Attention can disappear as quickly as it appears. But if ownership refuses to meaningfully adjust compensation during a growth moment, players may feel exploited. Morale could fracture, future stars might delay entering the league. Public perception could shift against management. There is no painless outcome here. The cleanest solution would be innovation, expanding revenue sources rather than fighting over the current structure, exploring nil-style sponsorship supplements, creating hybrid revenue models, building mechanisms that reward growth without destabilizing operations. But innovation requires trust. And trust is exactly what feels thin right now. The WNBA is at a crossroads. This could be remembered as the negotiation that secured a new economic era for women's professional basketball. Or it could be remembered as the moment momentum stalled because both sides overestimated their leverage. The clock is ticking, expansion deadlines are approaching, season preparations can't pause forever. So it comes down to this. Will the players soften their demands for the sake of long-term stability? Will ownership open the vault a little wider to reflect the league's rising profile? Or will neither side move and force a season into uncertainty? Because in high-stakes labor battles, someone always blinks. The only question is whether it happens before the damage is done.